everybody, and welcome once again to Vyten Council Live. This is episode number 2 of this series that we've been doing. The Vyten Council is an invitation-only organization for professionals to be able to publish content, connect with each other, and excel. We thrive in really helping our members grow and launch their careers in business. And we're here every single Friday at 12 p.m. U.S. Central Time here on LinkedIn Live. It's awesome to be able to have everybody here. And here's what's happening in business this week. LinkedIn has now actually begun testing advertisements within the LinkedIn Stories format in the United States and Canada. The Microsoft-owned professional networking platform is really seeking to be able to boost its advertising revenue. Since launching its own version of Stories in the US in September and globally in October, LinkedIn has said that its members and businesses have actually posted more than 3 million stories on the platform. LinkedIn previously tested ads within Stories in the Latin America and European markets. The stories span about 1,000 campaigns from more than 600 different advertisers, including WeWork, General Motors, and Bank of New York. The company says that the ads in the stories will be widely available in 2021. Tim Fullerton, Vice President of Content for WeWork, said that it would be strange if people use the stories on LinkedIn the way that they do on Instagram, but because that there isn't a LinkedIn's purpose. He continued to say, though, but if people are using them for conversations about business, then it totally makes sense. He said that it's like TV channels. A cable TV channel is going to be different than TNT, but they're both still going to be channels. Nielsen, the country's leading TV ratings firm, is planning a new metric that measures content and advertisements across TV and digital media. The company said that they would replace its current TV rating system by 2024 to be able to incorporate in digital viewing like streaming television, in addition to traditional audiences. The change is anticipated to transform how TV and digital video ads are bought and sold in the future. Currently, about $60 billion is spent on TV ads in the United States every year, as well as tens of billions of additional dollars in digital video and streaming ads. David Kenny, the company's CEO, said 2024 is the year that we take away the old stuff and, quote, just do it in this new way. JetBlue Airways is considering switching its advertising agencies after more than a decade. A company spokeswoman stated that their agency RFI will, quote, help them evaluate which resources can most efficiently address the changing customer preferences, as well as the new travel landscape as the airline, emerge from crisis. Many industries have been impacted by the pandemic, but air travel industry in particular is struggling as many of its usual customers stay close to home and fly far less often. I know I am. The trade group for America for Airlines reported that the U.S. airline passenger volumes is 65% below levels 1 year ago, with the 4 largest carriers losing about $11 billion in the third quarter. Airbnb's stock price more than doubled in its market debut yesterday, reflecting a soaring market for the new stock listings and the home sharing company's ability to be able to navigate the pandemic-induced downturn in travel this year. The stock began trading at $146 on NASDAQ, higher than the initial public offering price of $68 a share. The company ended the day worth $100 billion based on a fully diluted share count greater than the combined market values of Marriott, Hilton, and Hyatt hotels combined. And as many consumers stay away from in-person dining, one company, though, and its CMO, has blown up the way that the company's media plan is meeting a new reality. The marketing dive awarded Chipotle Mexican Grill its Dive Award for the Mobile Marketer of the Year award. With its in-store visits and marketing around sports being out, the company made delivery and curbside pickup a top priority. Chipotle doubled down on mobile marketing initiatives that have really been key to capitalizing on investments in digital, putting the company on track for more than $2.5 billion in digital sales just this year. Chipotle also found a new way to be able to expand on its messaging around sustainability. In October, the company launched Real Foodprint, which is a food tracker and an app on a website that lets diners measure and share the environmental impact of all of their orders.
Hi Internet, Bill Nye here. Chipotle just launched Real Foodprint, a transparent way to measure the impact of what you eat. You can see how a chicken bowl, like mine, impacts the planet when compared to conventional ingredients. How much less carbon is emitted into the atmosphere, how much water is saved, and how much soil health is improved. Just by eating real, responsibly raised food, you can do a little something to help cultivate a better world. Hungry yet?
Not only has Chipotle thrived this year, it's also set to continue its growth trajectory as consumer behaviors continue to shift. The company's digital sales grew 202% over the year to $776 million in the third quarter. And lastly, we wrap up our headlines today with the latest jobs report. Jobless claims surged by almost 20% to 853,000 last week as businesses began shutting down again in the face of the resurgent virus. Roughly half of the first-time applicants for state unemployment benefits were freelance and gig workers filing under the federal pandemic assistance program, for which those who would normally not qualify for coverage. The data last week showed that job gains in November were the smallest since the recovery started in May. The United States is in the throes of a fresh wave of coronavirus infections with more than 15 million confirmed cases. Daily COVID-19 deaths have now surpassed over 3,000 deaths per day for the past 2 days, setting new records. The director of the CDC has warned that the United States is facing a tough winter, saying, quote, "We are in a time frame now that probably for the next 60 to 90 days, we're going to have more deaths per day than we had at 9/11 or that we had at Pearl Harbor," end quote. New strict stay-at-home orders went into effect in California this week, affecting more than 3/4 of the nearly 40 million people in the nation's most populous state. And other states and local governments have also imposed restrictions on businesses as well, which economists expect to lead to layoffs during the winter, especially without additional pandemic relief money from the government. Each week on this show, we're going to invite recruiters and business leaders onto the show to be able to share their career strategies, mindsets, and tips. I'm really pleased this week to be able to welcome to the show Dave Fano. He's the former Chief Growth Officer at WeWork, where he increased revenue 100% year over year while the team grew by 200%. Today, he's the CEO of Teal, which offers a collection of resources that puts career development back in the hands of the individual. As an architect by trade, he was an adjunct professor at Columbia University, where he taught many different topics, including advanced drawing and representation, along with the fundamentals of digital design. Dave, good to have you on the show today.
Vincent, thanks for having me. Appreciate the invite and our friendship and our collaboration. And so this is really special. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you ever think that Airbnb would be worth more than all three of the major hotel chains combined?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that it speaks to, what technology can enable for, staid industries. And that's a lot of what we were doing at WeWork, was really bringing a new lens to a model that just had really not pushed to innovate. Right. And, maybe the large hotel chains had done some level of digitization, but to have a whole platform that doesn't actually have to carry that inventory and own those buildings. I know hotels move to franchise models and, but to really be an expansive platform and to really be customer centric, which I think is what really differentiates Airbnb, and really thinking about the experience and the end to end. Absolutely. I mean, I think for Airbnb, the sky's the limit. I really think that it's just the beginning.
It seems like so long ago that I was sitting in an office. To be honest with you, I don't even remember when that was or how long ago that was. And to be honest, I'm not sure things are ever going to go back to the way that they were. Facebook has announced that nearly half of their workforce will transition to remote roles over the next 5 years. Twitter's CEO, Jack Dorsey, has communicated that all of their employees will have the option to be able to work remotely permanently. As far as real estate or physical space goes, what can workers expect to change when they return to their offices, other than a few succulents that likely haven't been watered in too many months?
um, you know, um, I'm trying to be mindful on how I talk about this, because I'm a little bit I'm a little jaded, and I'm a little skeptical. I would hope that, for me, at the core of all of this is trust. And I feel like we're having the wrong discussion around whether we should be in the office and things like that. And I think what people really want in their careers is agency, autonomy, motivation and ability to do the work that they want to do. And I think one of the things that's most appealing about remote work is agency, right? It's like, I can choose to come in, I can choose not to come in. And, in so many things in my life, like, I don't have to ask for permission. I pick what restaurant I want to go to. I pick what I do on the weekends. But when it comes to work, it's like, I have to ask, can I work from home? And I think what people are liking is having that agency. If something comes up in the morning, I can do it. And what I worry about is it's less going to be about like the pragmatics and like the immediate. So like, let's fast forward a little bit. I mean, I think that's all just going to be on like how safe people feel and stuff like that. But I'm more interested in like 18, 36 months out. Are we back to normal because it's the human condition and people aren't trained to like manage and lead well? And I think that's why we're in the office. It's not because, look, I do think that you can't replace being face to face, but I do think that if we manage based on objectives and people did, put up results, there's a lot of like results-based management, that we'd be a little less concerned with thinking that like people were in the office, actually working, doing things, that my physical proximity to my manager is the thing that actually affected my career ascension. And what I'm hoping is that over this period of time, people have woken up to the idea that they can manage without being in the same space, and then they can give people objectives and people can deliver without needing to feel that like sense of control that I can see you sitting behind the keyboard and typing. I'm optimistic, but just having seen my fair share of bad managers, which is really unfortunate, that's just what people resort to. So I don't know. I think that companies will do the prudent thing. I think they will be mindful about not putting their employees in danger, also managing their risk. But my concern is, once things like really start to open up, are the people that go to the office the ones that move up? So therefore, will that start to pull everyone implicitly or explicitly back into the office? And that's the big question mark for me.
Yeah, I think that, there's a big question around results-oriented work environment, which has really been around since the mid-90s. People have talked about a results-oriented work environment. And what ends up being interesting is the marketplace for talent going forward. Will companies have to be able to adopt at least more flexibility in workplace as well as work schedule to be able to compete for the best talent? The audience here was shown a question up on the screen. Given the choice, would you work remotely permanently after the pandemic? And Adam says, given the choice, yes, I would want to work remotely, so much more productive. And I can definitely resonate with that, where there's less distractions at home to be able to do particular types of heads down work when collaboration isn't particularly required. We have Jeff Morrison, who says, I agree with Dave. I think remote work will be a paradigm shift, or at least the option to be able to do both. I never thought that I would see a world where employers took temperatures at the door, but today that actually seems pretty normal and pretty acceptable. Not a big deal. What advice would you give to somebody whose manager is actually asking about holiday plans coming up and travel? Do companies have the right to be able to ask employees what they're doing during the holidays?
Yeah, look, my short answer is no. Right? Like, if I'm getting my work done, and also for different kinds of work, right? So I think there's a lot of nuance in what companies do and what their obligations are. For me, at the end of the day, it's about communication and trust, and meeting the objectives of the company. And so, if our customers are happy, the business is working, it's not critical that you be online on certain times. But if you're a customer support rep and you've got like SLA requirements, of course you got to be on time, online at certain times. But I kind of don't care where you do it, and as long as it's communicative, it's one of the things we're trying to do at Teal. We really want to give as much agency as possible. So we don't want people, we have unlimited vacation, and there's a lot of issues with unlimited vacation, and we want to try to make sure we address those. But really at the end of the day, what we're after is people feeling like they have autonomy and agency. I don't want to have to ask if I can leave. Like, use the same judgment. Think like a business owner. Like, is anything going to break? Did I communicate it to my team? Did I let them know, hey, I'm going to be out this day? And so really more operating from a world of like FYIs than asking for permission. And, I think that that's important, that people get trusted and treated like adults. And when I just think like policies are cracks in culture. Like, the more policies that companies need to make, the less trust there is in the environment. And so that's like one of the things I think about is like, try as absolutely as hard as possible to not create a policy. Like, go back to the intent. I used to always joke, it's like, that one person gets caught being on Facebook all day, so a company bans it for everybody. That's not right. Right. And what that does is like, that's just like a race to the bottom and the lowest common denominator. That person's getting their work done. I don't care if they're on Facebook all day. Like, that's the important discussion. And too many people focus like on the means or like the symptoms and not the disease. And maybe that person's highly efficient and they're not being challenged enough. Or look, maybe they're just not connected with the work, and address it. But to do these like policies that you think address the bigger systemic things oftentimes just make it worse, and kind of like a bird's nest of policy. So I think companies should focus on results. They should focus on trust. They should focus on treating people like adults and give them the information so that they can use the same judgment that the business leaders do to make the best decisions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It sounds like in that scenario, it could be easier for a leader to be able to create a policy or put an IT restriction in place rather than have the difficult conversation about what really matters in performance. We're clearly going to be living in a gray space here. And, Lisa Sim says a mix of both. I would love the collaboration of being able to be in the office sometimes and being able to work from home during other times. And I think really that's going to be the future. We hear a lot about, the death of real estate and the death of offices. But the truth of the matter is some collaborative work really works better when you're in person. It's a lot easier to be able to, jump up from a conference room table and just grab a whiteboard and be able to sketch something out. And at the same time, there are workers who have headphones on. I'm thinking, software development in particular, where some of your most productive days are really staying focused and being able to crank through something. I'm interested from the audience how everybody's feeling about 2021. In the meantime, while we're taking a look for chat comments from the audience about how everybody's feeling about 2021. I know of a particular CMO, and we'll have him on the show later on next year, who actually started a new job in April of this year. And he's been telling me that he's never met his team in person, something that would be absolutely unheard of in the first 90 days on a job, at least in the past. What are some things that employees can do right now to be able to safely meet and build relationships with coworkers?
Is that a question for me or for the audience?
For you.
So we've been thinking a lot about this and how do you build rapport? And we're going to be creating a bit of content on this in the new year. I think like empathy is really important, and putting in the time and energy to understand people. I think there's a lot of things that we don't realize that we have the ability to do when we meet a person in person, right? We do have this kind of like sixth sense for EQ. Is it a person that, talks a lot? Do they shake their knee? Do they kind of look around the room a lot? Like those cues are a little hard to pick up. And so, things like how are we coming off? How are we affecting the person? And so that's why we're big time believers in work style and behavioral assessments, and really trying to pick up on the cues of a person, just something simple like introversion, extroversion, and being mindful of that. And, if I'm a better talker than I am a listener, but I'm engaging with someone who's a listener, well, I'm probably going to never give them a chance to talk because I'm going to take all the air in the room. So being mindful of those cues. And, I'm actually not a big believer in the golden rule of treat others the way you want to be treated. Obviously, at like the fundamentals, I believe in it. But in a work context, I need to be really mindful that, again, using that same example of introversion, extroversion, I'm an extrovert. And if I treat everybody like an extrovert, let's say half the people are going to be kind of put off by me. And so I think in this more virtual than physical world, we need to tune our ability to understand people and realize that those abilities that were just kind of like happening naturally when we were in the physical space, we need to develop, right? How to do it virtually. And that might be putting in the work like you do when you go to interview, research your colleagues on LinkedIn before you meet them for the first time. Think about the way that they communicate, think about how they use Slack, ask, engage, hey, is it cool if I, Slack you? How do you use Slack? Or Teams or whatever, should I just direct, message right away? Should I, cluster it all into one and send it to you at the end of the day? And I think that that extra effort to be empathetic and understand people will go a really long way in accelerating relationship building in more of a virtual work setting. And I'm also a big believer in personal user manuals. I know that people have a fairly binary reaction to them and think, well, that's really arrogant for me to, give a manual on how to work with me. I really think of it in the opposite way. I think that it's quite vulnerable. And I think it's pretty amazing to say, hey, look, these are the things that I know. This is where I excel. This is where I fail. This is the way I like to generally communicate. Obviously there's just the way that you write it. But I think if you think and put that out there and say, look, let's get to know each other better. And instead of like learning these things the hard way, let's accelerate it and let's just, exchange how we like to work early on. So I think it's really about communication and putting in that extra work, to build that trust with your colleagues.
Yeah, the barriers between work and home have definitely come down this year as work has kind of just invaded the home space in general. The truth of the matter is great leaders, great managers are still finding time to be able to do team builders in more creative ways. And the people that did these types of events to be able to build better relationships in the past are the people who are still doing it today. Although it might look a little bit more like have Amazon Prime drop off some ingredients and everybody cook a meal virtually together.
Yeah, we just did a dinner last night for a bunch of our members, and we sent them all like a Seamless or Grubhub gift card, right? So they could, pick what they wanted and we can enjoy a meal together. So there's all sorts of very cool things you can do, but these are like new techniques we have to build and learn in this new world.
And build and learn we will. So there's some really great advice in there. As we wrap up the year, annual performance appraisals are top of mind for many workers. In a world where, children are homeschooling, it's normal for dogs to be able to bark on Zoom. How can employees prepare for a conversation with their managers while still justifying this kind of odd year that we've all had?
Yeah, look, I mean, like all things, it's preparation, right? You still have to be, your biggest advocate. Self-advocacy is something a lot of people struggle with. We look down on sort of bragging and arrogance, and there's a fine line between arrogance and confidence. And in a world where people aren't watching you and seeing how you participate in the office, you need to do a better job of speaking up for yourself and talking about the things you do. So people should be keeping a regular journal of their achievements. We talk a lot about this like future resume. Be writing that all the time. People through the job search get, let's call it like really fit. And then they let all those muscles atrophy and then they do it again. And like, don't let that pattern happen. Keep it constant, continually document your achievements, engage with your colleagues, get feedback. Don't wait for HR to do the performance review process. Run your own, get on there, do that preventative care for your career. And try and come with questions and try to engage to learn and really understand like where the business is going, right? Think about your contribution to where the business wants to go. Obviously, think about where you want to go and where you want to take your career, but you work at a company that's trying to do amazing things. Think about how your contributions are helping the company grow and what value you're contributing and, how, whether it's a growing revenue or saving money, what are your contributions? And then how can you grow through that lens and document it all, be prepared to make your case, for why you think you should be growing. And then also get clear on your asks. Right, that people can't read your mind, and they don't know like where you want to take your career. The company may have an idea of your career path and what it means to go from a BDR to running a sales team. But that may not be where you want to go. You may want to go from inside sales over to marketing. Make your case. Right, don't feel bad about that. You don't have to say, I need it right now, but be mindful of where you want to go.
It's incredible to me how many employees I've worked with in the past who have accomplished incredible things. And then at the end of the year, none of that shows up in the 200 words that they wrote describing their best accomplishments. I like what you're saying there in terms of keeping an ongoing, journal or portfolio of this. I always used to tell people, if you're a company that uses Slack, you can literally share a message to yourself on Slack. You can send a direct message to yourself. And every time that you have an accomplishment, you could just send it to yourself at the end of the year. You'll have a rolling list there. If you're, a little bit more traditional with email, you can literally just make a folder and file all those emails all in one place. At the end of the year, you'll have everything in one spot, and you'll actually be able to write your annual performance appraisal, at least your self-review part, a lot quicker. In the past, Dave, you were a chief product officer as well as a chief growth officer at WeWork. How does the CGO role differ from the traditional CMO or chief marketing officer?
So I can talk about like what I thought it did, right? We all know titles are all over the place and companies use them in very different ways. But the idea was, because I kind of went like, should I go chief revenue officer, chief marketing officer? The company was very open to like what we made my title. But at the end of the day, I had supply and demand under my remit. And supply was the physical space and demand was sales and marketing. And so those really were the two levers, especially in that business, for growth. If we didn't have supply, there was nothing to sell. And if we weren't selling, there'd be no need for more supply. And at the time, they were in two different parts of the organization. And as much as we tried to bring them together, it was just tricky. And we were as we were growing into enterprise and doing more account-based selling, we really were relying heavily on the product organization to enable sales. And we could have created a sales enablement or a technical sales group or solution sellers. But we thought, look, let's put them together and let's not double up on staff. Let's try to leverage the product team and let's integrate those. And that's really what was going to drive growth for the company. That at the end of the day was like what I was accountable for, making sure that we were delivering supply and that it was being filled up. And so that's why we called it, chief growth officer. And in some companies, that's generally what you see is they've got 1 foot in product of some sort and 1 foot in what would be traditionally sales and marketing. Now you've also seen it where growth is like combining sales and marketing because now they have the full funnel and maybe less so the product side. So it's just like all things growth and they don't have to worry about product and supply. And in some businesses that probably makes more sense. So I think those are the kind of two ways you see it because there's always been this tension between sales and marketing. Marketing gives you the MQL, then sales takes it over and then they can be in tension of like, well, I'm not getting enough leads to get enough closes. Well, okay, well, we're giving you the leads, but you're not closing them. And so I think what we've seen in what I'd call like the revenue roles is, look, let's just put those under one roof and let's be done with that bickering. Because at the end of the day, what we need to do is grow. And that's the entirety of the funnel. And I think that's probably what we're seeing shake out as like the more common definition of growth, where you see like growth manager, growth marketing manager, senior growth marketer, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think what's abundantly clear is that leaders, in order to be successful in the future, regardless of what the title or what that line on LinkedIn says, needs to be somebody who can work functionally across different departments to be able to accomplish team goals, team success in general. I think the second thing too is that the world of kind of fuzzy marketing attribution is behind us. The data is going to be able to drive the business, and businesses are no longer interested in having good branding if it doesn't drive both top and bottom line.
100%. Yeah, and I think it's becoming more and more empirical because it's more and more measurable, right? In the worlds of like offline and out of home, it was a little harder to measure. But with everything being online and digitized and apps, it's much more measurable. And if you can't create campaigns that are measurable and you can't see the ROI, just the sort of broader brand building isn't going to cut it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely right. The days, especially now with tighter budgets during a pandemic, you can't spend money if you can't justify what exactly that's doing, and justification in brand awareness just isn't meaningful, especially when brand awareness today done well through social, it really doesn't cost any money. What about the new chief revenue officer role that we're seeing at some startups? If somebody is moving towards this growth, this revenue type of role, what are the skill sets that are kind of future-proofed if they choose to invest in those skills today?
Yeah, so I would say like, the C titles that we're seeing in what I would call like the more macro growth category are CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, CRO, Chief Revenue Officer, CCO, Chief Commercial Officer, CBO, Chief Brand Officer, and then CCO, Chief Communications Officer. And then maybe like depending on the company design or creative. But they're all focused towards growing, and it depends on how the company thinks about it. And a lot of it has to do with like how the org has developed over time and the talent you have on the field. But what I've seen is when a company has a CRO, it is usually going to be more of a sales-led organization. You're going to see more like B2B enterprise. It is the most senior expert on how to build and structure a high-performing sales organization. They might be complemented by a CMO, but they really own that like middle to bottom of the funnel and its revenue. Like they are responsible for the dollars. Now they may not, so it's really the closing. They may or may not, again, have marketing in their remit. But when a company has a CRO, it's someone who is responsible for all that revenue of the business. And it's more focused on top line, not bottom line. So like ops is focused on like the cost cutting and, in the middle, they get to that profit. But the CRO is usually generally focused on top line and a very high B2B enterprise sort of boots on the ground sales is generally what I've seen.
Yeah, we have a great question from the audience here, and this wasn't a planned topic, but the Chief People Officer is showing up as an increasingly popular title as well. In the past, some companies had a CHRO or a Chief HR Officer, and the Chief People Officer, I think, really represents a much broader role when you talk about the environment today, diversity and inclusion, and people development in general. I think traditional HR organizations are a lot of times perceived as being risk managers and really an enforcement arm of the organization, rather than the Chief People Officer really being a people enablement organization. What would you say?
So I'd say be mindful of when companies use titles as internal marketing. I generally, in my experience, is CPO is a rebranding of CHRO because the compliance functions and the people ops functions usually fall under the Chief People Officer. I haven't seen very many companies that have a CHRO and a CPO. At WeWork, we had a Chief Culture Officer that kind of sat outside of it. But at the end of the day, there just wasn't as much oomph in that role because we needed to make sure that we were doing all the right things. And so, eventually we had like talent, learning and development, compliance, comp, or total rewards. I think we called it there. So, what I would say is like focus less on the title and really look at the makeup of the organization, because titles just don't tell us much. And so you'll really understand the intent of the organization, right? Is your HR function under finance? Is it under operations? Does it report directly to the CEO? I think those are far more telling than the label they use. And so if you've got a Chief People Officer that reports into finance, I wouldn't put much weight in the fact that they renamed it because it's going to be cost driven, and so that's really what I would look out for.
A lot of the times too, you can take a look at the background of an individual and kind of take a look at their career path to really be able to understand what their priorities are. It'll be interesting to see if this works, but we do have time for an audience question. So let's open up our phone lines. If you have a question for Dave, about careers, growth, marketing, career paths in general, give us a call. It's 866-VYTEN-60. That's 866-VYTEN-60, 866-898-3660. And we'll see how this phone line works on a live stream. In the meantime, you've had experience with sales and marketing for the solopreneur at WeWork, which is kind of where the roots of WeWork was, all the way up to these enterprise real estate solutions for some of the largest brands. What are the three trends that marketers or product owners need to keep in mind for in 2021?
So I would say WeWork was all B2B, right? We had a pretty good job. a B2C-esque feel, but it was B2B at the end of the day. And the way I thought about it was that when I'm, as a consumer, when I'm making a purchase, am I using my corporate credit card or my personal credit card? Is this a thing I can write off or can I not? Right. And in my mind, most B2C things I cannot write off. It is not a business expense. And so it goes into a different category of my thinking. So I'll speak to it in the terms of B2B. I'm a huge believer in account-based marketing. And I think that growing accounts is the future, because then, you spend that investment no matter what, whether you're a SaaS business or, more of a transactional business. I think it is about that LTV and building that long relationship with the customer and expansion. And so there was different strategies on whether we were selling into Amazon and, they were getting real estate over the globe and giving them an account manager that could, manage their whole portfolio of millions of square feet, or if we were selling to a 1 or 2 person startup in New York City. But that 1 or 2 person startup, right, that could have been Airbnb 8 years ago, and they needed that first little office. And now they're an IPO and they've got an amazing global head of real estate who's super sharp and really thoughtful about what they do. And so understanding how the account progresses and how you are elegant and sort of smooth about those transitions. So I think account-based marketing is really important. I think the handoffs of those relationships and those accounts is really important. And then also the full life cycle. Don't just focus on the transaction and the acquisition. Be really thoughtful about the implementation, the customer success, and the full life cycle, because a lot of these companies can grow. And if you are an LTV-based business, you really want to think about net negative churn and how those companies are growing. Because if you get those accounts to expand and you can get them to take more licenses, that can oftentimes be more impactful than acquiring those new logos. So that's what I would think about is account-based marketing, account transitioning, and expansion.
Yeah, and in account-based marketing, I think this is where sales and marketing collaboration ends up being even more important. You can't have 2 different messages in 2 different parts of your funnel. And the truth of the matter is the marketing technology is sophisticated enough today to be able to identify web visitors and really cater messaging to a specific person on a website. Gone are the days of being able to hit a generic homepage and expecting the end user to be able to click the right segmentation to be able to lead to the message that you want them to see. Your team today at Teal enables people to be able to build fulfilling careers. What's something that business professionals can do next year to be able to set themselves up for a fulfilling career?
So what a lot of people do with their careers, they treat it very reactively. You're busy, you're working, things are great. And I think what everyone saw last year is you don't know what's going to come. And focusing on what's next. Don't be forced to think about what's next. Proactively focus on what's next. We really want to empower people to take control of their career. And the way you can take control is if you plan and you have that sense. And what we've seen is people are a little reluctant to do that because it feels like it's out of their control. So what do people do is they go and start a company because it feels like it puts them in control. But I promise, speaking, firsthand, and Vincent, you can probably do the same, is you're not in control when you run your own company. There's market dynamics. So there's always externalities. If you can set goals, if you can be deliberate and intentional about where you want to take your career, you can then start to put a plan in place and take action. So what we would say is start to really think about what's next. I think the other thing that we've seen with this kind of general career advice is, building a 5-year plan or, and we think that's too far. We think that the best products in the world take an agile and iterative approach. They understand what the market is and they adapt. And I think now the world is moving faster than ever. And so the notion of a 5-year plan is crazy. And I think people can now get experience in a much faster way. The idea that you need to be in a job for 2 years means nothing. I promise you, someone who was at WeWork for 6 months, when the company grew almost 100% every 6 months, was getting way more experience than 3 years at a company that wasn't growing. So I think time is also kind of a funny thing. So be clear on the kind of experiences that you want to attain and don't let time be a blocker. Just identify those experiences, be mindful of what those roles that you want require, and start to build a plan to do it.
I love what you're talking about there in terms of really focusing on the experiences. I've always hated the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I once had an executive coach who literally pulled me aside in a large leadership development workshop, told me it was unacceptable that I didn't have a great answer to where do I see myself in 5 years. And I think the big thing I've learned from that is People focus way too much on what they want to be. People say, I want to be the president. I want to be rich. I want to be living in New York, in this type of a place. I want to be part of this organization. I want to be, this job title, instead of focusing on what they want to do. If they focused on what they want to do instead, that's really honestly the thing that's going to give them passion and purpose in life. What do you want to do? Do you want to help other people? Do you want to serve other people? Do you want to teach other people? Do you want to support other people? Do you want to make the environment better? These are types of things that describe what do you want to do in a year from now or in 5 years from now, as opposed to what you want to be. Dave, thank you so much for joining me on this Friday afternoon. If you're kicking off a job search in the new year, the Job Tracker by Teal was actually the #4 product of the day recently on Product Hunt. It's one I'd highly recommend. It's a Chrome extension that actually lets you easily save jobs from sites like LinkedIn and Indeed, tracks your progress throughout the job search, and it uses a keyword analyzer to get your resume on the top of the pile. You can download it for free at tealhq.com. Dave, thanks again for joining Vyten Council Live. You have a standing invite to come back and join anytime, my friend. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Vincent.
So thank you so much for joining Vyten Council Live. That's our show for today. We will see you back here after the new year. And our next show is going to be on January 8th. For a full schedule of our Vyten events, you can follow our calendar at vyten.com/calendar. For more information about the Vyten Council, head over to vyten.com. Let me know what you thought about today's episode and who you'd like to see appear as a guest on a future episode. You can also text me directly at 615-667-8433. That's 615-667-8433. Add yourself to my phone's contact list and we'll be in touch soon. Take care and we'll see you next time.